Welcome to the People by People podcast with me, your host, Laura Sutherland. I hope you're all well. Once again, I'm apologising for taking so long to give you another episode, but I was waiting for some good content because there's no point in just churning out content if there's no purpose to it and it's not going to help you in any way. But today I thought it'd be really useful to talk to you about the G in ESG because it's often forgotten. So E obviously is environment, S is for social, and G is for governance. And just to kind of give you a little bit of perspective on this, I relaunched Aura, my business, on World Environment Day with a specific focus on sustainable business. And I've been conducting a lot of one-to-one webinars over that time, and they're meant to help explain my proposition and how my groundbreaking synergy framework works. Along the way, I've been tweaking my slides and my thinking, just to kind of be more clear, taking people's points on board about what they like, what they're taking note of, and maybe some things I can improve on. And in a recent webinar, I was talking to the head of corporate of an agency, and the person asked me about governance as part of my framework, and said that I focused on sustainability quite a lot, which inferred the E and the S. Now, in fact, there's a common misconception about sustainability that sustainability means it is the environment, as in the carbon footprint or the energy, etc., and the effect on the planet. However, sustainability actually has a much bigger meaning, and that is around looking at the health of the economies and people and communities and the planet. So sustainability is actually about how can we be sustainable as human beings? How can we have longevity? How can our businesses have longevity? And so sustainability is actually about looking at how can we future-proof. That's how I like to put it to people. How can you future-proof your business, your organisation? Given that change is inevitable, and at the moment change is happening at a great rate. So then I kind of went back to the UN Sustainable Development Goals because I'm a great believer in using them as a framework or as a sort of guide to where we should all be aiming and working, because they're there, they exist, it's for the UN, and why wouldn't we use something that currently exists? Now, I'm not saying that every one of those 17 goals and 169 actions is relevant to every single business. I'm not saying that at all, because they don't. But it's up to us to choose the ones that are relevant and to make sure that we prioritise them and action them, even more importantly. But when I look back at the synergy framework, which I've talked to you about before, the very first point in synergy is clarity. And when I talk about clarity, working with new clients about the in the synergy framework, it's actually one of the things we have to talk about is clarity on the current governance of the business or organisation before we even start. And that's because it's that has to be part of the transformation process and program. And if we don't know where we are or where we're going, how do we know what we're supposed to be doing in terms of governance, how it's working, how effective it is, or how actually it might not be working at all? So the G, the governance in ESG, is actually something really important that we need to be considering. And it shouldn't be at the end of the process or after the strategy or plan has been developed, because sometimes governance structures are broken in the first place and need fixed. But it all comes back to purpose, the makeup of the role of the board of directors, values being aligned, ethics, transparency. Obviously, if there are shareholders, then structure, reporting, risks and systems measurement are included within that as well. But good governance means listening to stakeholders, things that matter to them on a higher corporate agenda. and things that customers can be benefiting from, employees, communities, as well as the shareholders. And this is why the stakeholder relations part of the synergy framework is so important. You need to get to know them intimately in order to represent them and engage them. And this comes as part of the governance. Now, if we look at the governance sort of operating models, you've got a higher structure in terms of organisational design and reporting, and you've got the committee structure and the charters and policies. And then underneath that, you've got the sort of oversight and responsibilities for the board oversight and responsibilities, management accountability, and then committees, authorities and responsibilities alongside that. And then underneath that, there's talent and culture. So there's performance management, incentives, business and operating principles, leadership development and talent programs. And then underneath that, you then have infrastructure, which are your policies and procedures, reporting, communication and technology. And sustain governance is important. By sustaining governance is important because you need to create that sort of feedback loop, and where the board and management can identify and respond to new business, operational, competitive and regulatory needs, because the governance aspect is the sort of more official part, let's say, of the organisation, and it's the bit that needs to be wholly transparent and written down and very much ethical. And then if you look at a sort of framework, you've got the sort of board governance, which is the all-encompassing thing. And then with underneath that, you've got the corporate governance infrastructure. So that's looking at, you've got the board who oversee the whole organisation, the C-suite, and then you've got the corporate governance. So that's for all the operating stuff. And then within that, you're looking at performance, strategy, talent, integrity, compliance, reporting, operational things, planning. But at this sort of nucleus, as I refer to things a lot of the time, you've got culture, and culture is bred within organisations. Essentially, it is there because of the people and how they're acting, how the organisation acts and what it says and what it does, and the people that represent that organisation. And therefore, in the middle of that, you then have a certain risk element. And risk is a huge part of the stakeholder relations piece. And when we look at our stakeholders, we should be doing risk analysis on them. We should be working with risk teams, if there is such a thing within an organisation or a business, if it's that big. If not, then we should be looking to develop risk registers, and we should be actually doing risk and scenario planning so that our governance is as watertight as it can be, and so that we have covered all avenues to make sure that the integrity, the strategy, the performance, etc., compliance is all above board, transparent, ethical, and operating properly. If it's not, that is where you will find that the role of public relations comes in very strongly, because we then have to deal with issues management and potentially crisis management as well. And that's something that we don't want to do or have to do retrospectively. We want to be sure that upfront and central we have everything in place to make sure that our governance is A-OK. And also to make sure that we are setting that culture as we want it to be, as our stakeholders expect it to be, as our teams want it to be, because that culture is what will help develop that business or organisation in the future. And so there's much more to governance than just kind of talking about some policies. Governance is there for people to make decisions, for the board to kind of come back to, and to make sure that it translates the element of the governance framework and policies into the actual practices, responsibilities within the actual governance, the corporate governance infrastructure within a business or organization. So it's not something you can immediately grasp if you're not familiar with it. But what I would say is that if you're developing ESG strategies and plans, if you are someone like me who straddles the sphere of sustainability, ESG, corporate communication, stakeholder engagement, stakeholder relations, internal communication, etc., then governance is absolutely something that we need to be talking about more often. It needs to be on agendas, it needs to be revisited, it needs to be, as I say, watertight, ethical, transparent, and in alignment with everything we just talked about. So that's a really quick podcast for today, but I hope that gives you some sort of perspective on the importance of the G in ESG and why it's really important that we do not forget to include the governance aspect up front within our transformation plans, change programs, and whatever you want to call it, and what you're working on just now that will ensure the sustainability of your business, because the synergy framework has been created to help businesses and organizations accelerate to a sustainable future. And coming back to the meaning of sustainability, it's about future-proofing the business. It's about looking at all those UN Sustainable Development Goals and saying to yourself, well, in here it talks about well-being, so that's about the well-being of our stakeholders. So let's look at our teams, let's look at our customers, let's look at our suppliers. It talks about obviously climate change, so that looks at CO2 emissions. It looks at reusing, recycling. It talks about cutting, obviously, as well. But where things where people don't realise that the UN Sustainable Development Goals are absolutely spot on is when it talks about culture, and it talks about inclusion, and it talks about talent. And all of those things are about sustainability, because they are about the sustainability of your team, your business, your organisation, your brand, whatever you want to call it. They're about what the future holds, and they're all part of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and they're all part of governance too. So let's make sure that when we're talking about sustainability, when we're talking about governance, they're not things that are add-ons, they're not assumed to be one thing or another, that we're very clear that sustainability is about future-proofing, it's about having a future. And when we talk about governance, we know in our businesses and our organisations what the current governance models are and what the processes are, and then what they need to become in order to be a more sustainable business, and a more responsible business as well. There's nothing to stop organisations from revisiting this regularly, updating them, and moving with the times as things evolve, as technology evolves, as people evolve, as world events happen. So must our businesses and organisations. And all too often, larger organisations cannot move quickly enough to change, and they need to be more agile and flexible in how they do that going forward. Anyway, that is enough. I do not want to waffle. I hope that has given you a flavour of sustainability, governance, the G in ESG, and if you have any questions at all, or if you'd like to work with me in any projects where I help you use the synergy framework in your organisation or business to make it more sustainable by looking at integrating stakeholder relations, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, strategic communication, telling that compelling story, and also reporting and evaluation, then please do give me a shout. I'd be delighted to speak to you. And just one last thing I want to get in, just to let you know, I've opened up my book for 2 private clients for my mentoring and development plan, which helps people to overcome challenges, be more confident, get that career step up the ladder. If you're even looking to find out more about how strategic public relations can help your business or organisation, then if you're a CEO or if you're an MD, then this mentoring and development plan flexes to suit the needs of the individual. So it's very much about helping the individual develop and understand more to progress. So do give me a shout if you're interested in that. And I hope you're all having a good week. Don't forget to subscribe to the People by People podcast, and please do leave me a review, because reviews help other people understand what they're getting into, what you enjoyed about it, and maybe their motivations for subscribing also. But thanks again for tuning in, and I will speak to you very soon.